Okay, so firstly, congratulations on your third win as New York's Sportscaster of the Year. Can you walk us through what inspired you to pursue a career in sports broadcasting?
Well, I was always a big sports fan as a kid. It My first goal was to be a shortstop or a power forward, but I didn't have the talent. And I didn't even realize that sportscasting was a potential career until I got to college and started in college radio. Um, it seemed like a far-fetched idea that it was possible to pursue that as a profession. But as I moved through college and started thinking about what I was going to do after college, um, it seemed like the most fun thing that I could think of. So, fortunately, I was able to make a go of it, and it's gotten me to this point in my life without ever having to really work because, the job is so fun.
That's good. So, starting in college radio, to now, can you walk us a little bit through your path from how you went from college radio to like as you are now?
Yeah, I went to Columbia University in New York, so that presents um, opportunities, but also obstacles because it's very hard to go straight from college radio in New York to being on the air in the country's largest market. So I realized that I would either have to sacrifice being on the air or being in New York. And I decided to go the route of being on the air in smaller markets so that I could get the experience that I needed to be able to eventually be where I wanted to be. So I took a job actually as a news person in a small radio station in northern New Hampshire. I went from there to a slightly larger station in South Carolina to do sports. Um, but I wasn't getting the play-by-play opportunities that I wanted. So I eventually moved to Norfolk, Virginia. And from there, I was able to get a job doing single A baseball in Durham, North Carolina in 1986, and parlayed that into a triple A baseball job in Pawtucket, Rhode Island in 1987. I was there for 2 years, and then I was fortunate enough to land back in New York with my childhood team, the New York Mets, in 1989, and I've been there ever since. It's my 37th year broadcasting Mets baseball.
So, what were some of the obstacles that you faced in trying to get into the market, and what were some skills that you learned facing all of those obstacles?
Well, I think that every job I've had has propelled me forward. I think going back to when I was in college, I got a job working for Sports Phone, which is trying to explain it to people of today. Um, it's almost like prehistoric. It's before the internet. It's before anybody had instant access to information, and it was a phone number that people called to get the scores of the games. And so what we would do is we would gather the scores from the wire services and from our connections and press boxes, and then every 10 minutes we would update the announcement with up to 30 scores in 58 seconds. So that taught me how to really talk quickly and enunciate properly to be able to fit all that information into a short period of time. So that was very useful. Um, my first job out of college, as I said, was for a small radio station in New Hampshire and covering news, which meant planning board meetings and city council meetings and covering fires and stuff like that. So, that gave me a good sense of how to um, connect with people, how to understand what was important and what wasn't, and turn that around and make it into a coherent story. And I wasn't doing sports at the time, but I think that those skills helped me later on in terms of being able to suss out what's most important about a story and hit the high points. Um, Then when I went to South Carolina and I was covering high school sports and doing morning sportscasts, I think that that gave me an opportunity to hone my skills of covering sports and being lighthearted and understanding how people relate to sports and I also had play-by-play opportunities there that I hadn't had before, so that was helpful. And then doing minor league baseball, that prepared me obviously for what I'm doing now. But, I was working in the minor leagues without a partner. And so there's this fine line of how you entertain people when there's nobody to laugh at your jokes. And you have to be able to visualize an audience and speak to them one on one, even when it's one to thousands of people listening at a time. So every step of the way you learn a little bit and you move forward and you hopefully are able to translate those skills to the bigger job.
So, good research, being lighthearted. What are some other skills that you think you learned going through all of these different careers?
Well, I think a lot of it goes back to childhood because I think that you can't be a baseball broadcaster without having been a fan of the sport from the time you were a kid. I think there's a whole language of sports and particularly of baseball where there's so little action and so much time to fill between the action that if you don't know the language, it doesn't really resonate with the people that you're talking to. So there's that. But I think also my parents instilled in me a love of reading, and I think that reading builds vocabulary, and I think vocabulary builds skills as far as communicating. You know, we do 500 hours of baseball every season. That's a lot of talking. And if you don't have the vocabulary to be able to mix things up and be more creative than just repeating the same phraseology over and over, I think that that gets boring for people. Um, catchphrases are nice, but it's the time that you fill between the action that really separates one broadcaster from another. And I think that learning how to expand my vocabulary, learning all about the sport and the history and the rules and the rhythms and the language as a kid, I think have paid off in where I am today.
So how do you prepare for a broadcast now, and how do you balance being like informative but also like lighthearted and fun?
Yeah, for preparing for a broadcast has changed a lot since I first started. Um, the sources of information that we had when I first began, even in my major league job, were very limited. There was no internet, and cable news had just reached its infancy. And um, you'd go out and grab the USA Today, which gave you a little blurbs on different teams and what was going on in the sport. But a lot of the preparation involved calling people and getting some firsthand information about what was going on with various teams. Now everything's changed. I mean, now you have, I mean, I could spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week gathering information for the broadcast. And I think now the challenge has become what to leave in and what to take out. Um, Between statistical information and all the various websites that cover the sport, I think there's so much that is available to us, but there's still a value in one-on-one preparation, being in a clubhouse, talking to players, talking to managers, talking to coaches, learning as much about individuals and their humanity. And I think that ends up being the most important piece is that there is so much out there um, statistically now. You don't want to overload your broadcast with numbers because people tune it out. I can honestly say in 37 years of covering the Mets, I have never had um, a person come up to me and say, I wish you'd do more statistical analysis, or, I wish you'd delve more into sabermetrics. they don't do that. What they do is they say, what's David Wright really like? What's Francisco Lindor really like? People want to know the people you're covering as people, and I think that that's the piece that is still the most important preparation. Um, as far as how the balance goes in the broadcast, I think that's more of a feel thing. I'm very fortunate to work with partners who I have a great relationship with, Keith Hernandez and Ron Darling. We've forged an incredible bond over the last 20 years. And, when the game is tight and things are happening, we are very baseball oriented. And when the game is lopsided and things are kind of boring, we talk about other things and we engage each other in ways that I can't even explain. It's more of a running conversation. It's more like sitting at the game with your friends. Uh, but people happen to be eavesdropping on us. I think that's the best way of describing it. And I think most days we find a pretty good balance. Sometimes it's tipped one way or the other, depending on the game itself. But I think that sometimes the trap that broadcasts fall into is scripting what you're going to do over the course of a game. We very rarely do anything like that. We follow the flow of the game, follow the flow of our own thoughts, and I think most of the time it works pretty well.
Right. So my last question is what advice would you give for people who are looking to get into sports broadcasting?
Well, I can't really speak to sports broadcasting in general, but I can speak to play-by-play, and that's my best advice has always been the same, um, which is you grab a recording device, you go to a game. It doesn't matter if it's a little league game or a high school game or whatever game you have access to, and just start talking and describe what you see and be be yourself. Just talk and be yourself. And then when you're done, listen to it, and you'll find that you're your own best critic. This sounds good. This doesn't sound good. I like what I did there. I don't like what I did there. And then go do it again and listen again and again and again and again. And the more you do, the more reps you get, watching games, describing games, talking about games, listening back to yourself, critiquing yourself, the more you'll feel comfortable in the role. And when you get to the point where you can stand listening to yourself and it doesn't make you cringe, at that point, ask somebody who has some professional chops to listen to it and critique it, and then go back and start the process again. And that's really the only way to learn how to do it because everybody is going to have their own style. Everybody's going to have their own ways of doing things. There are certain nuts and bolts in a broadcast that you have to be aware of, giving the score, or explaining what's happening, but especially in baseball, there's so much time to be creative and to be a personality and let people inside your brain, that there's no one way to teach somebody to do it. The best way is to go out and do it and then refine it. And that's how you get where you want to go.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Thank you so much for giving me some of your time and getting the opportunity to learn about your insights and just your job in general. And congratulations on your win. You definitely deserved it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it greatly.
Of course.